And good day and welcome to this Corporate Access with me, Tania Habimana. Today we will focus on the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, which is a provincial government agency established under the auspices of the Department of Economic Development to provide support to small, medium and micro-sized enterprises and cooperatives in Gauteng. Globally and locally, SMMEs and cooperatives are the engines of growth, and it's the mandate of the GEP to promote, foster and develop small enterprises, build a support network and integrate all government-funded agencies operating in the province, in so doing promoting economic growth, job creation and equity. Joining me now is the CEO of the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, Saki Zamxaka. So, Saki, you joined the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller in the middle of the pandemic last year, 2021. But you've got quite a bit of experience in terms of supporting SMMEs. But I'm quite interested, joining the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller at such a challenging time, was there anything that kind of changed in the type of support that you needed to provide the SMMEs?
No, thank you, Tania. Yes, definitely. You're right, it was the most interesting time. One thing about, crises, they always offer a downside, but there's often an upside into them. And that's what's been happening in the SME environment. A lot of them have been affected, especially the hard lockdown. Those who are in the retail sector, for example, couldn't trade because they were trading outside. So it benefited basically the bigger businesses, more regulated. So that was very big. It affected even people who were running their own things, maybe in their own houses. Now with restriction of movement of people, that was a bit of a challenge. But some sectors did grow. For example, digitization became a bit of a thing. So some businesses which were able to assist corporates work offline were able to do something. We saw some of the telcos going big on digging up fiber because people were now working at home. The building sector picked up a little bit because some people were renovating their homes and doing certain things. So there were certain very interesting movements in the sector.
And so in terms of your role within all of this, did you find, because I understand that the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller provides funding but also non-funding type support. So did you find that you had to shift the type of support that you provided to these companies?
Yes, we did. So a couple of things. So as an example where we don't give somebody money, we had a number of businesses that are small coming to us where, let's say, property owners were completely unfair in the way they were treating them. So some of them would come to a small enterprise and just lock up their doors. Now that doesn't help anyone. If you lock doors of a business, they can trade. And again, we knew that a lot of it was related to COVID. So you either can enter into payment arrangements with your tenants in those environments, and some of them, even have ESD programs they could have used. So in that environment we help. So that would be one example. The other one, we set up a fund with the IDC, especially relating to the looting that happened, where half of the money was a loan and half of the money was a grant. So those are some of the things we've done. And then in January, we also then launched formally what we called a contract-based finance, which was if you have a purchase order or a signed contract, we can finance you to help you fulfill that. Because again, a lot of entrepreneurs have cash flow challenges. So that was one of the things that we did. So there's several, initiatives we've been busy with.
So what makes a great application?
It depends what it is. So there are others that are very simple, like the contract finance one. Contract must be signed. We must be able to verify it with whoever the counterparty is, because we've structured it to rely on the other party that is paying. So we take security on that. So if you have a signed contract, the entity you're delivering to can confirm, and your basic compliance documents, tax, company registration, it shouldn't take very long. But what we often find, somebody comes, they have a contract, but it's not signed. Now, if it is not signed, what if it doesn't get signed and you don't get paid? So usually those are the difficulties. Of course, other things where it's a longer term loan, we're taking a view now about the future. So try and convince us a little bit that the future you are painting is based on something. And that's where then at times entrepreneurs, because they're very convinced, they forget that we also account differently. If I give you money and your business fails, then someone is going to want to say, at the time I made the decision, did I have at least some basis of saying, it had a future to succeed.
So what does happen when a business fails and they've received support from you?
So several things happen. I mean, if a business fails, it got a grant, we will check whether they fulfilled the conditions of the grant. In certain occasions, we'll check whether there's anything that can be done maybe to mitigate some of those factors that contributed to it. Where it was a loan that you have to repay and you're not paying, of course, there's various things. One would be to look at whether the loan can be restructured. If it can't be restructured completely, what can be salvaged out of it? Because as an entrepreneur, you then maybe bought something and those can be salvaged, and maybe in certain occasions there's a level of security that you did put, and we'll get into it. But really our interest is also looking at what may have contributed to that failure so that we don't repeat it.
So in terms of feasibility, I mean, what I've seen quite recently, quite a lot actually, is entrepreneurs that spend a lot of time in the idea phase. Yeah. Is this something that you back? What are your views on this?
I think it's important to spend a lot of time on the idea, not theorizing about it, but looking at, can it really work? And what is it that maybe you can either add as value or you figured out that is very different to somebody else. So let's say, as an example, I mean, Gauteng is not in short of restaurants, but you may figure out a place where the type of food you're selling maybe is not available in that area, or your service is great, or there's a new settlement and therefore there's new demand. So there's always something to figure out, and I think you do find at times that people have ideas and they think they're the first ones to do them or to think about them, and half the time, I mean, whatever you're going to think about, somebody else has. It's who gets first into market, who has the support, and who can make it work. And I think it's important to really figure that out, because when they then get to funders who see tens and hundreds of applications, and the funder asks questions, it seems as if the funder is dispassionate and they're not sympathetic to the entrepreneur. But you know that everyone, comes with passion, but it doesn't mean that that passion is enough. Is there a market? And it doesn't mean it always has to be a purchase order. When you open a restaurant, there's no purchase order, there's no letter of interest, but at least indicate that you've studied the market. You understand how many restaurants are around, what are they selling, how are you different to them, have you been in the sector, or this is the first time you're getting into the sector. Because again, those experiences mean something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you've been a waiter in a restaurant or a manager,
it helps.
It helps because you know how it works. If you're going to start an engineering company and you have no engineering experience at all, at least maybe then hire engineers who are going to help you in it, or professional services. So whatever it is that you do, at least show the funder that you've tried to mitigate some of the obvious risks.
Yeah, and actually a successful businessman once told me that if you have an idea that no one has thought of and no one has tried, I'm actually a little bit worried. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. I mean, it's often, and this is now almost an unfair way in which funders look at things. If no one has done it, why?
Exactly.
That's often the instinct. And that's not because anybody thinks that what you're trying to do doesn't make sense, but there's enough brains and money in this world that people are always trying to do something. So but also, even outside of that, it then means we all don't know what the risks are. But at least if it is something that has been tried, you can say, I've seen these successes, I've seen these failures. But ultimately, funders aren't always the people to always listen to. If you want to pursue a business, pursue it. And maybe, family and friends at that stage can be the ones that support you.
Absolutely, because that is an option.
Yes.
The family and friends and the fans as
Yeah.
as a first port of call in terms of receiving funding and support.
Yeah, well, others say is friends, family, and fools.
That's the one I didn't want to say. But moving on, looking at the companies that you're currently supporting, what do they look like in terms of size, in terms of industries, and perhaps the number of companies that you currently have on support?
So we've generally, on our various financial products, ranged at between 5 and 10 million finance per transaction. So that sort of gives you a sense of the types of businesses we would be funding, and then we have no floor limit, so from small up to that. So that's the sectors they're in. We generally not sector specific, because we're trying to get all the priority sectors of the province. So the provincial strategy has 10 growth sectors, which covers pretty much everything. So we do focus on that, on what it is that we do. And some of them, I mean, are supplying goods and services based on an order. Others are doing manufacturing. Others are micro enterprises in a smaller. So it's a variety, but we generally fund those entities who would otherwise not get funding elsewhere.
Let's meet one such entrepreneur supported by the GEP.
My name is Sicelo Mieni. I'm the owner and director of Feasibility Engineering Services. Feasibility was founded in 2018. We provide turnkey solutions in civil, building, structural, mechanical, and electrical engineering. We currently have 30 employees in employment. Feasibility approached GEP, which is Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, requesting funding to acquire assets like a TLB and a tipper truck. We utilize these assets in our construction activities, especially in the civil earthwork environment. We had approached banks to try and acquire funding, but it proved difficult to acquire funding through the banks because of their stringent funding requirements. And as the results, we then approached GEP, which were a bit favorable to us as an SME, because they spend a lot of time trying to understand how the business is run, understanding the business model, and assisting the business in terms of the growth, mapping the growth plan. So they then approved our funding, which was to acquire our first TLB and our first tipper truck, which are key assets in the construction. Our partnership with GEP is only just at the beginning. We utilize a lot of equipment in the construction space. So the first assets that we've acquired now, which is the TLB and the tipper truck, are just the first of the many equipment that we still need to acquire. Our plan is to grow with through the funding that we are receiving from GEP. We plan that on a year to year, we will continue to acquire assets, and GEP is our strategic partner in terms of financing our business to acquire more assets.
Your mandate, your mission is focused on Gauteng, and I'm sure that you have the equivalent agencies in the other regions or other provinces in this country, and perhaps also in other countries. Between you and me, is there a little bit of competition?
Oh, of course. If you're not competing, then you're not alive.
So who's winning? And what I'm trying to get at is there a best practice, or maybe something that you've seen in terms of an agency that is doing something out of the box in terms of supporting these SMMEs?
So there's actually a lot. I mean, we benchmark ourselves on and see what's going on. So at a sort of macro level, I think East Africa is generally doing well. They've had higher average growth than what we've seen in SADC. And I think that always drives then the sentiment. I mean, you know, if you go to Kenya, Rwanda, the sentiment is generally positive. In SADC, you have places like Botswana where also the sentiment is a little bit positive. Then when you come into South Africa, certain sectors, I mean, hospitality in the Western Cape has been growing. Business process services have been growing. In KZN, they've also been growing. I mean, they've also done quite a bit on the creative arts sector. And I think us as a province, I mean, we've gone big on pulling together funds. The GEP historically has been lending less than 100 million a year, and we've now gotten into partnerships that already sit at between 500 and 600 million. So that's where we think things are going to change, because if you have X amount of money, you have X amount of money, there's so much you can do. But now with these partnerships, I mean, we started with ITC on the rebuilding fund. On the looting, we put 50 million, they put 50. And then we did another partnership with them, we put 200, they put 200. And then on top of that, SMME has come and put, you know, another additional 100 million. And we have another pipeline of, you know, potential partners that are being considered.
And I'm glad that you raised that, because I was actually wondering, in terms of partnerships, how an agency such as yours is able to partner with other agencies for growth and for scale in terms of the impact that you have. But what are your targets looking like in terms of what you hope to achieve over the next year?
So it's we were given 250 million, and the target was that we leverage that to $1 billion. And how we're leveraging it is that the province, through GEP, is taking higher risk on it. So we take first loss of typically up to about 20%. So that means you now are able to absorb a little bit more risk than you would if you were not in that fund. And that's really what we've done. So ITC has come in as a result of that. SME has come in as a result of that. And we have a pipeline, I mean, of about 800 million. Well, of course, you know, we're not likely to approve all of it, but it is being considered. So it shows that there is appetite in the market for these kinds of partnerships when government comes in and incentivizes the risk.
That's quite interesting. And I'm curious to hear, what does success look like for an organization that would have received support from you?
Well, Tania, a very simple thing, sustainability. I mean, if you continue operating, we would love them to be profitable and expand, but the first step is that if you can sustain your business, be cash positive, and reach a point of profitability and expand, that's the success for us, because then you can pay more taxes, you can employ more people. There's a lot more things you can do.
And I'm quite curious, and this is maybe a hard question, your favorites?
Okay, not favorites, but maybe examples that can demonstrate the kinds of things that we do. So on that rebuilding fund, we had at Baramall an entrepreneur who had a bakery, employing 16 people, and they were looted. They got then the financing from us, half of it, which was a grant, because we were trying to put them back to the position they were in before, and then a loan which then allows them some sort of working capital to get back into business. There's another engineering business we funded, which was expansion. There's a pharmacy we co-funded with the ITC, which also was looted. And then there's a lot of contract financing that we do. As I'm saying, when an entrepreneur needs R1 million, and like, you know, can I call Tania and borrow R1 million, or who can give me this? Because, you know, often, you know, typically banks as financial institutions, that's not a risk they can take. They look at your turnover and say, you've not had this history before, you know, this is maybe too much operational risk and too much financial risk. So we're trying to get into that market, but also most importantly, we're doing it at affordable rates, so that you don't end up with entrepreneurs who are in the same boat. They borrow today, half of their profits go to repaying the loan, and they back to square one. If they can properly capitalize themselves into the future, it then helps.
Absolutely. And if you had to make a call for entrepreneurs using this platform, who are you looking for?
So we're looking for ideally entrepreneurs at every level, micro, medium, who need financial support for businesses that they can see have a potential into the future. And then those that are still at a very startup stage or require some sort of subsidy, we then will maybe help with equipment, with marketing, and various other things. So we have no limitations on what we can do for entrepreneurs. But again, the partnership, as we see it for us, is that help us with things that work. Because the more we give money and the money is not repaid back, the taxpayers look at us and think we're reckless. So there's always a balance to be done, that while we want to assist everyone with the resources that are limited, you've got to prioritize those that look like they have the most impact and the most likelihood to succeed.
And in terms of entrepreneurs that are starting out, that are maybe not at that level yet, what would you recommend to them?
Just do it. I think that's the basic thing. Business, we can learn, we can have experiences elsewhere, but you'll only get better once you get into it. And yes, it is tough getting funding in South Africa, but I think there is a lot more money going into SMEs. I think people have realized that you can do so much with big business, that the real growth is in smaller businesses. So it's no longer now just the right thing to do. It's a commercial reality, and I think that has been very positive on the amounts of monies that are going there. As I'm saying, just the province, even though 500 million is still not enough, you've moved 5-10 times on money now that's been mobilized. Now that allows you to do a little bit more scale. So that's always positive, and I think these are the good times for entrepreneurs on these funds. Of course, everyone is like, well, we hear these things, but we've been applying, we didn't get the money. Continue applying. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy on the people who must make the decisions, because they are competing applications. But the more funds are available, is the more the scope for stuff to be done.
Let's meet the owner of Carnival Biscuits, a small business that has had links with the GEP for 2 years and then also received some much needed relief after the July 2021 unrest and looting.
My name is Solimu Japilu. I'm the founder and the owner of a company called Carnival Biscuits. The company basically is a biscuit manufacturing company. It's based in Soweto. It has been in operation for the past 20 years. The connection with GEP, quite frankly, didn't actually start quite recently. It started back a couple of years back in the Township Entrepreneurial Awards. We were actually quite thrilled to be one of the finalists under the retail category. It was an exciting event that recognized small businesses from the township, and it was then how it started. The GEP is providing quite a lot of insight and knowledge for both financial and non-financial support to small businesses. So it's a great government agency that's very open to helping small business to grow and to really introduce new players and to give guidance where it's needed. We service mostly our products to hotels, the coffee shops, the bus industries, conferencing facilities. So when the increase in those places does occur, there is a substantial need for us to employ or to get more people on board. The intervention that came through from the GEP from the last year, one of our stores was terribly looted. Everything was taken. Water was all over the show. It was a mess, and really appreciate that intervention that came from the rebuild package that we were able to apply for at the GEP. And quite important was that the process was very timeless. but it came in at the time when we really needed help. And obviously that was just also because we were quite compliant. And that is a very important part in most businesses that we like to encourage, emerging and young, especially in the township, that, business must always remain compliant, be it your revenue services, and everything else that, is required. Remember, government institutions, they're playing a vital role in involvement in, trying to help small businesses. So it was quite a very important intervention that came at the relevant time when we needed it.
We do have an audience of investment managers, corporate executives and the likes watching the show. What would you say to them? Because what we often hear is that they don't necessarily fully understand how the SMME landscape functions, but they would like to understand how they can get involved. So what would you say to that?
I think, there's a lot of talk now by institutional investors of alternatives. That includes, social impact investing in infrastructure, in more riskier stuff, and. But a lot of them, unfortunately, are not quite incentivized yet to take those kinds of risks. Because if you're sitting as a fund manager on 80 billion rands and you're charging your fee, and now someone says go and lend to people who want to borrow 200,000, it takes me the same amount of time to evaluate a 200,000 transaction versus a 200 million transaction. So why should I do the smaller ones? But I think there are people who've built capabilities to interface with smaller entities, and I think those who are sitting on money can then use those channels to be involved in the dirty work that the bigger entities are not involved in. But I think anyone who's betting on the future, if you're not in the alternatives and you're not in the SME environment, you're not really going to benefit. Because I think, there is a little bit of saturation on the top companies, whatever measure that you use. And we also know that, whether it's COVID or, global political pressures, they have shown that you can't rely a lot on global value chains on everything that you do.
True.
You do need a level of localization. And I think that level of localization is going to come from small and medium enterprises who are agile enough to compete. Because, a big company may be like, this is not worth our while. But for a smaller entrepreneur with lower overheads, certain things, are competitive for them. So I think the environment is really moving to favoring smaller businesses.
Absolutely, and also the integration of supply chains.
Exactly.
Well, Saki, thank you so much for joining us today. We will definitely be on the lookout for all the work that you do. And yes, thank you so much for joining us. That was Saki Zamxaka who joined us today, and thank you to the audience. Until next time, it's a goodbye for now.